Welcome back to Breakfast Television, and you are seeing visuals of the rally and demonstrations that happened here in Toronto, and of course across the U.S. There was many demonstrations happening in major U.S. cities and even smaller ones as well. And this is, of course, due to the murder of George Floyd at the knee, I would say hands, but at the knee of a police officer in Minneapolis. So that's kind of sparked a lot of conversations, and conversations that you have to have with your kids.
That are very tough to navigate. Here to help us with that is psychologist Dr. Maneet Bhatia. Good morning. It is so good to see you. We desperately need your advice at this tumultuous time. Where do we begin?
Yeah, and Dr. Bhatia, I want to say this. We see some of the visuals, of course, of the demonstrations, the fires being lit, the looting that happens as well, but the peaceful protests that are going on. But it all stems from that video that we saw of George Floyd getting murdered. Do you show this to your kids? And if you do, what do you say to them?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me. And it's very difficult times, and it's heartbreaking to see what's happening. And with respect to that video, I mean, it's quite traumatic. It's extremely traumatic. It's hard to watch as an adult, as a person of color, as a human being with humanity and compassion. So what I'd say regarding children is, you know, for young children especially, I would be very, very cautious to probably not show them that video. Obviously, we live in an era where social media and access to images is quite easy to get. But it could have a very long-lasting traumatic impact on our children. So wherever we can, we need to be able to limit images that are traumatic or violent or gruesome. Now, that doesn't mean, for example, that if we don't share those images with them, that we don't talk to them about it. I think it's important to talk about race issues, injustices, violence, but I'd be very careful and cautious to try to avoid exposure to very gruesome videos.
Even for us adults, it takes its toll. It's a lot. And I know I pick up on a lot of what my husband is listening to on his phone. He thinks I can't hear it. I'm busy, like cooking or whatever. Kids are picking up on stuff all the time when you think maybe they're not tapping in or listening to either the radio or the TV. So what conversations do you have, and when is it a good time to sit them down and chat and see if they're doing okay?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think I want to pick up on your first point there, but when you're watching it and it triggers something in you or your partner, I think that's important too, because our children learn and vicariously through modeling or through observation. So if they're noticing mom or dad are watching something and it's causing them some sort of reaction, that'll also pique their curiosity, like what's going on and what are they reacting to. So I think that's also important as we talk about this particular tragic incident and the idea of race conversations about anti-racism and justice, that as parents we need to also be mindful of how we're contributing to those conversations, either consciously, unconsciously, or through our actions. But I think the point you're raising is an important one, because I think if kids talk, they have friends, they socialize, they catch the news. So I think when you're hearing about news in the world, and your kids either bring it up to you and say, hey mom, hey dad, what's this thing I heard about this person in the States and so, I think it's important to sit down and have those conversations. I think staying silent for many of us, it can be a form of privilege for some, because we don't have to face these issues. But also for many of us who face it, it triggers a lot of our own anxieties, because how do you talk about these things even with adults, let alone your child? So I think it creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of, for some of us, shame or guilt or just fear. And we try to avoid these conversations. But the problem with that also is, to your point about it, if your kids are watching it or hear about it and we avoid that conversation, then we're allowing other people and other messaging to kind of control what they learn about race versus coming from what your perspective is or what you'd want to instill in your children as their parents. So there's no perfect answer to when to talk about it, but we know in research that it's never too early to talk about race, because it affects all of us, and injustice affects everybody. So as young as we can, we start to have conversations around race, around injustice, around discrimination, because the earlier we do that, the sooner we become more aware and we can start to become more conscious of these unconscious parts of our experience at times.
Yeah, and having the conversation with the kids is tough. We've been very transparent about experiencing it. Anybody that's in this position in media, I can tell you, has probably experienced it as well. And talking to your kids right away, how do you tell them not to be scared, to go out there and still live a normal life? Like, how do you even explain that message?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think the first answer to say is to normalize their anxiety, their fear, their anger, their sadness. So as parents, we need to demonstrate, the capacity for emotional expression. And so then we need to be able to sit with that with them and not to say, hey, don't be scared, don't be sad, don't be angry. That's just minimizing, that's repressing, that's suppressing, which will not help them both in this example, in this moment, but also in their own development as human beings. So acknowledging the fear, saying, I'm glad you shared with me that you're sad or angry or scared. And that's normal because I also feel scared. I also feel sad. I also feel angry. But it's also talking about the fact that in life, there's complexities. There's not a black and white, there's a lot of gray in there. And we have to learn to understand that some people will do things that are, that are bad, that are not healthy, that are, unconscionable at times. And yet there's many, many, many examples of people who are trying to be part of change and trying to support healthy movements and healthy action. And you can be part of that change. So it's not a simple black and white answer. It's very complex, the situation. And I think that also, as parents, can trigger some of our other anxieties because we can't solve or fix this as parents because this is beyond all of us in many ways. It requires all of us together. So if we share that feeling of, oh my goodness, I have to solve this and have all the answers, how do I even face this conversation?
It's too overwhelming.
Correct. And I think it's being able to say, let's have this conversation together. Let's talk about how we feel. And as parents, we try to make them feel secure, make them feel safe, but we don't shelter them from some of the realities, because if we do that, we can unconsciously contribute to silence and to turning your eye towards these things that happen in this world.
There you go. Dr. Maneet Bhatia, thank you so much for all this information. And you're right, man. As kids, it's better to get it from your parents. As parents, you want to be the one delivering the message to your kids so they don't get it from outside sources. So thank you for all these great
points
and tips this morning. Yeah.
Helping a lot of parents out there. We'll be back with more BT right after this.